The world is built for B2C companies to go to market. It's not built for B2B companies.
We have a customer who has built their entire B2B business off of Meta. It's tens of millions.
When a company's spending north of $20K a month on digital ads.
Insights into the innovations and revolutions of the marketing world. Welcome to the Marketing Scientists Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Marketing Scientists. Today, we're going to talk to Keith Putnam-Delaney from Primer. Primer is an amazing startup that is reinventing how you do targeting for B2B audiences, but on all major social and programmatic channels. They have an amazing piece of tech, and we talk all about it in the next 45 minutes. So let's dive in. Okay. Keith, this has been in the making for a few different few months, and we've talked about doing this for a long time. So I'm glad we're finally here. And I actually want to start with going straight into how did you come up with this idea behind Primer? Like, what was the first sort of insight that led you to go like, yeah, this is what I want to dedicate 10 years, 15 years of my life to?
Oh, that's a great, yeah. Well, I don't know if I thought going into it. I thought it was like kind of unrealistic. It's like, no. We'll exit in 5. We'll be one of those. But in all seriousness, I was at a startup and got kind of good at data wrangling. And then I left. I was fooling around with a bunch of different ideas, none of which were in the marketing space. And I was doing consulting. So I'd do a month on, month off of consulting and advising. And I just found myself recreating the same system at company after company. And then I was like, oh God, somebody's got to build this. And then I was like, oh, well, none of these other ideas really work. Why don't I try this? And we tried it, right? So we built an MVP, my co-founder and I, scaled it to about $1 million in revenue pretty fast. No subscription, just usage-based. And we were like, ooh, okay, there's demand here. And the idea, right, is combining lots of first-party and third-party data to unlock different growth emotions. Kind of what Clay's doing in some respects, right? We were just trying to do it within the modern data stack. And then but we found that there were a lot of issues and complexities in it were unforeseen, as it happens as you embark on a startup path. A lot of these APIs are absolute dog crap, and being reliant on marketers have instant expectations. So taking 72 hours to build an audience for them, combined, even if it takes 12 different data sets, they don't care what's happening underneath the hood. They just want the output. And maybe that's why Clay might hit some sort of ceiling. I don't know. They're probably working on that. I'm sure they are. But that led us to ultimately pivot and then rebuild the product from the ground up and then relaunch and yada yada yada. And, now it's blazing fast. And when you're growing, it's something you definitely want to dedicate your life to. You're excited to go to it. When you're like firing customers and your revenue's dropping because you realize that you built the wrong thing, that's kind of that. There's some existential pondering that happens, but
yeah.
No,
good on you. No, that's a great story. Okay, so you went 0 to 1 fairly quickly with this usage-based model, and here's my interpretation of like what you all do, right? So Primer helps B2B marketers essentially do better targeting on all of the social channels that are, obviously, like, I'm not putting my work identity into my, Facebook account or my Instagram account or my TikTok account. So you're connecting the dots between Pranav, founder at Paramark. Well, how do they show up in Instagram and TikTok? And you're helping connect those dots so you can reach your B2B audience on those channels. Was that how I should think about it?
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. It's sort of the world is built for B2C companies to go to market. It's not built for B2B companies, as that is at the essence of why we exist and trying to bridge that divide.
It's wonderful. Like, everybody that I know in the B2B space should be using Primer. So if you haven't heard of Primer, you need to go check it out right now. What's the domain? Let's just get out of the plug and then we'll talk about the rest of the stuff.
SAY sayprimer.com. So sayprimer.com.
There we go. Okay, awesome. And we've seen our customers kind of flock to it and start to use it across, earlier stage startups to, pre-IPO companies, like everyone's in there. So that's awesome to see. Okay, now you brought up Clay, and I'm not a Clay user. Maybe I've had an account that is probably dormant, or I haven't really sort of figured out how to use it. Maybe my Clay skills need to get some exercises there. How do you think about what's happening with Clay? What's happening with tools like Koala? What's happening with all the first party, third party? Like, break the ecosystem down for us a little bit. Like, what's going on in this whole, like, there's a lot of buzz. Everyone's raising money, like billion-dollar valuations, but like, what is really going on? What's different from 5 years ago? Because, sorry, I'm going to go on a little tangent. I feel like none of this is new. Like, you could do this 5 years ago, right? Or am I just wrong?
Here's what's changed though, right? What's changed is what hasn't changed. And what hasn't changed is there are very few places to be discovered, right? We have a few companies that dominate and control the channels. Meta, Microsoft, Google. So if you're trying to crack the inbox, right, you've got to go through one of those. You got to go through Microsoft or Google. If you're trying to, run a search ad, if you're trying to advertise. Long story short, so limited channels has created this this dynamic that we're seeing of, okay, if I have fewer places to be discovered, I have to iterate on how I get discovered. And I think that is what has pushed people towards being more focused, towards focusing on intent, towards refining their strategies within these channels, because they don't have another choice.
Okay, got it. So what you're saying is, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when capital was a little bit more free flowing, you could kind of spray and pray. But as the number of channels have stayed limited. In fact, they've gotten even more concentrated, you can argue. And there's only a few $1 trillion companies, and so you need to find ways to kind of get an edge. Totally makes sense.
Yeah, and at the same time, right, there's been an explosion of competition, right, for attention. So you could spray and pray 10 years ago, first because the inbox wasn't as hard to crack. It's a lot harder now, and then second because there were just fewer people doing it, so you could still break through the noise. Now everybody's doing it.
Yeah. Okay. So, one question that I have for you that's kind of related to this, I see this all the time on our favorite B2B social media platform, LinkedIn. This channel is dead. Like, literally, I had somebody post this, somebody like very well known in the industry post this and got 800 likes or 900 likes, and it's still growing. It's like, you can't do ads and email and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And you got to do organic, you got to do small events, you got to do webinars and, CEO-led stuff. And I'm like, I look at that and like, my reaction was like, you're missing the point. But I'm curious what you think about that statement. Like, are there channels that are just dead? Like, is that a reasonable statement to make in this day and age?
No, in fact, I think it's the channels are zombies. They always come back to life. I mean, it's the law of shitty click-throughs, right? And it's the herd mentality. As soon as people, that offline, right, is having a resurgence now because nobody was doing it. So it was actually a way to break through the noise, and then as soon as people start throwing a million events, your customers are going to get bombarded by these invitations to events, and they're going to stop accepting them and going to them. It's just, it's the cycles of channels.
I love what you just said, which is everyone rushes towards this new thing because it shows signs of life, and then you oversaturate it, and then it's dead. And then you move on to the next one, and then those dead channels come back because somebody found a new angle. Now, this is what makes marketing really hard, because you have to keep a pulse on what's actually working and resonating from quarter to quarter, because it's not the same. Like, it could be that your, advertising on a certain channel is working really well in 1 month and then, not doing as well in the next few months. And this is exciting. So talk to us, to our audience about how you all activate this data. So let's talk about the first party and third party data. You and I have talked about this in the past, but Where does this data come from that helps power Primer's sort of engine?
Yeah. Let's take a step back for a second
Sure.
and compare it to the world of consumer marketing, right? So if I'm Nike, and I just have a built up an incredible list of potential customers, tens and hundreds of millions that have willingly given me their email, their phone number, all this information that I can use to retarget them across channels, right? And that's exactly the same information that they give to Facebook, that they give to Google, that allows Nike, when they sync an audience from their CDP into Facebook, to have an extraordinarily high match rate, like 80% or something like that. In the world of B2B, we're not so lucky. First of all, we have, the first party data we do get is in email, a work email. And that's nice for pushing to LinkedIn, for the most part. But it's not really usable on any of these other channels. People don't log into their Facebook account with their personal email. So we have to, in order to kind of replicate the B2C motion of leveraging first party data, B2B marketers need to take advantage of third party data, which, there's a weird underbelly of third party data. Like there's dudes with like ponytails in Florida, like slinging data. It's sketchy, for sure. But there's also very above board sources of third party data. Most people in the US, they download that free mobile app and they click accept terms of service. They're paying for it in a way. What they're doing is they're giving that mobile app, for example, the rights to sell their information. And it's fully opted in, but that's an example of one of the sources of how third-party databases get built up over time. And what we've done at Primer is figured out who are the ethical sources of data, who are the high-quality ones, what are the data points that matter in matching to these ad platforms, what's the right way to package the data to maximize the match rates, all these kind of component pieces that actually sort of allow you to kind of replicate that, to build an audience that's targetable on these B2C oriented ad channels.
Got it. That's fascinating. And yeah, you're 100% right that there's, anytime we talk about data and third-party data, there's always sketchy stuff and there's above board stuff. Have you seen any changes with regards to all the privacy conversation that's happened over the last 4 or 5 years, right? So Apple's done a bunch of work on privacy. Google was going to do some work and then they kind of, backpedaled and now they're taking a different approach. Do you see that being a hindrance to what you all do, or that hasn't really happened?
It hasn't really happened for a few different reasons. And God, I've got some conspiracy theories about Apple that I could go off on.
Let's do it. This is the time.
Everybody loves Apple. I'm like, Apple's I feel like they're doing some shady shit. But anyway, yeah, within this ecosystem, it's all about consent, right? So that's the key. You have to have consumer consent to be above board. What we're seeing happen is, there is the web is getting more opaque, and that's a good thing for people who want to protect their privacy. People are using Brave. Yeah, they're using Firefox. They are definitely clicking on Ask App Not to Track. But then you have a lot of people that aren't. A lot of people like me who still use Chrome, and I don't really care. I like that targeted ad. I appreciate those things that pop up in my newsfeed that are like, oh yeah, I do want that. So there's still a lot of those people, and so long as you're getting consent, it's you're gonna be okay as a marketer. I think Google's in a really tough spot, because if they remove more control, right, from the hands of third-party advertisers, they're actually going to get themselves in a trickier regulatory position than if they leave the ability for third-party advertisers to have some degree of control over targeting, right? Similar things going to happen with Meta and these other platforms. So I think we're in an interesting point where it's not that there are definitely fewer people that you will be able to successfully target because
Right.
of privacy restrictions. However, it's not going to go away. It's just going to shift. And the value, for example, of the cookie is going to be a lot less than the value of the personal email, which is going to be, more valuable than the IP address. But the IP address all of a sudden matters a lot more too, right? So all those things.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay. So let's take an example of, a customer. Let's say Paramark was to start using Primer, which I'm excited about actually. How would it work? Like what does Pranav do to get maximum value out of Primer? Like what is step 1, 2, 3? Like break it down.
Yeah. So you kind of have to come in with some degree of an understanding of who your target market is. And I would say Primer's not a great fit at this point for pre-PMF companies who are still trying to figure out who to go after and who are just beginning to experiment. You should still experiment first on LinkedIn and Google search before you come to a Primer. We have some capabilities built in, like we can help tell you, based on your Salesforce data, what attributes you should focus on. We kind of have features around that. Then you come in, you construct your audience, right? You shape it, and then you sync it out to these destinations. You start running your campaigns. You start gaining conversions. Primer helps you sort of report out, like understand which audiences are performing best on which channels. And then you can keep kind of refining, as you said, right? Things can change month to month. So you keep refining your strategy and evolving as you go. What I'm really excited to begin to build into the product is more help in that campaign construction and optimization side of things. I think knowing who to go after is really important. But as I mentioned, right, these channels aren't built for B2B. So in some cases, you have to do things that you may never get out of the learning mode. For example, on Facebook, if that's the case, how do you know how to optimize your campaign? I think we're in a position to help solve that, and that's going to be a big focus of ours this year.
Very cool. Okay. And what are the channels that, you have abilities to connect into, and what are channels that are sort of on the roadmap? So like, does it work for everything? Like, could I do CTV on Primer, or am I off the mark?
You can. You can do it through DV360 if you have access to DV360. So we natively integrate right now with Meta, LinkedIn, Google, and you can apply audiences across any of the networks within those properties. We also have beta connectors to Reddit, Twitter, TikTok, Bing, and I think Amazon's going to come shortly too.
Amazon.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to talk about
Yeah.
Amazon. How do you wait? Where on Amazon is the inventory for B2B marketers?
You mentioned CTV. So I actually got hit with some Vanta ads on Amazon Prime recently, which I was like, shout out Christina. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, that's very interesting. And is Microsoft's platform also, are they still doing Netflix, or is the Netflix advertising stuff gone a different direction? Do you know?
I'm actually not sure. That's a great question. Yeah.
All right, we'll check into that once we end the episode here. Okay. Very cool. So you come in, you define your audiences, and those audiences, are those sort of company lists or people lists, or both?
Both. Right. Okay. So, I think what typically happens, right, is you can also connect your CRM, and we can pull in records from your CRM. You can filter by any field on the, HubSpot or Salesforce objects. And you can kind of construct your audiences based off of all the key attributes you would, right? I think most people define their ICP and different segments of their ICP by a combination of company and person level attributes, right? So you could have, for you guys, maybe it's like, we want to go after companies using the following technologies that have over this much annual revenue, and we want to target the heads of analytics and marketing, right? That would be a great audience to test that.
Right. Very cool. Okay. And, you and I had also talked about a few months ago about how you were trying to help your customers figure out better reporting and incrementality, right? You got interested in incrementality, and we had a deep conversation on it. So, we haven't talked about it for a few months. So I'm curious, like, what you found, what was in the rabbit hole, and where did you land in terms of how you advise your customers and thinking about the incrementality of using Prime?
Well, first of all, if you haven't already, dear listeners, please check out Pranav's blog, because the Paramark blog, I spent a lot of time. I think I read every article in the blog. And it really helped ground me in this approach, right? And it comes back to the privacy issue that we talked about, right? So last touch or touch-based attribution, which I don't know. Do you have another term besides touch-based attribution?
It's just like, multi-touch attribution, first
Multi-touch,
touch, last touch.
Yeah.
These words are so clunky. I hate them.
Yeah.
I even heard, that incrementality is not a real word.
Yes, I had somebody laugh on a call recently when I said the word incrementality, and I'm just like,
not a real word.
Yeah,
Incremental is a word, but like, so
right.
Anyway, back to your point about first touch, last touch. Yep.
Yeah. So if that's really hard to do, and one of the biggest challenges I think that a lot of B2B advertisers don't recognize when they get into advertising on platforms like YouTube or Facebook is that it's all mobile, right? And turns out B2B customers don't tend to convert on mobile. Exceptions to that rule, but so you think Google Analytics, you think Hockey Stack, you think Factors is going to be able to bridge that divide between the person who saw your ad on mobile and then came via direct to your website on their desktop and requested a demo? No way. Like, they can't do that, right? So, but does that mean you should only throw more money into LinkedIn and keep raising the CPMs?
No. Keith, give up on LinkedIn and YouTube. Sorry, give up on YouTube. Like that's not. Give up on Meta. Give up on Instagram, where billions of people hang out. Like, just give up on it.
Totally. That's a B2C channel. It doesn't work for us. And it works. You just can't measure it the way you're used to measuring it, right? And that's where I think that conversation needs to shift. And I think it's begun to shift a lot because incrementality, MMM, and all of these things are such big conversation topics at larger, more sophisticated companies, particularly B2C companies, and it's trickling into B2B. But with Primer, since we control the audience, we're literally pushing it an audience. I mean, it's sort of obvious, light bulb went off. I was like, why don't we build in holdout groups and compare the conversion rates of the two? I was like, it was so simple. And I was like, why were we doing this like a year ago? This is crazy. That's what we're doing. That's what we basically built that into all of our audiences. A holdout group, we compare the conversion rate of the likely exposed group to the definitely not exposed group, and see if there's statistical significance. See if this campaign, this channel is working for you, or no. Right?
That's amazing.
And go from there.
I mean, I have to give you your flowers because there's not many platforms that do this. Even when you go to Google or like LinkedIn doesn't have this, right? You actually have to call somebody on LinkedIn's ad team to set up a holdout. And then, it takes 2 weeks for them to do the design and come back to you. So the fact that you have that in your platform, you can do it, you can get up and running with a holdout is awesome. So for everybody who's doubting it. Now, one thing that you said, right? This helps you understand whether the channel is working or not. I think what you really mean is whether your specific execution on that channel works or not. And going back that, the evergreen, like this channel is dead. No, it's not. You just have to figure out the right creative, the right copy, the right messaging. But giving up on a channel because your last iteration didn't work seems kind of silly.
And look, I get giving up on a channel that's hard to measure because you have to be able to justify your spend. But there's ways. I'm looking at you, Pranav. I'm looking at us, Primer, to measure. You just got to go outside of your norm. You got to recognize that things are evolving and educate yourself about how to do it differently, how to do it better.
Is there an example that comes to mind for you in terms of a customer who's just like found something very surprising by, using Primer? Like, you don't have to disclose who it is, but if you have a fun story, it'd be fun to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of emergent use cases for us that I didn't expect. People are applying the audiences in new ways. Like a classic campaign type that most B2B marketers have dabbled in and then immediately written off is the performance max type of campaign on Google. Turns out works really well with Primer audiences, and it's sort of like, which is great. Google
That's
search
awesome.
is another one. This was an old problem of ours back in our Dropbox days of exclusion audiences. That's a use case for us that's really, really powerful that has been sort of taking off in the last few months.
That's interesting. So hang
Yeah.
on, let me pause you on that one. So when you say Google
Mhm.
search, you mean that if somebody's searching for, a keyword, and you're able to sort of, because you have the audience, only show your ads and bid when that search is part of the audience and not the long tail of consumers who might also be searching for that keyword and have nothing to do with the intent for that particular thing. Okay, that is awesome. I didn't even think about that you can actually use this on Google search. This is cool.
Yeah,
This is awesome.
There's also the flip side of suppression audiences. You're like, I never want to serve this ad to somebody with the following attributes. Yeah.
Makes total sense. Okay, you've given me a lot of ideas. Now, you said that, earlier stage companies probably, don't want to go to Primer right off the bat. And I think I understand why you're saying this, right? Because if you've done zero experimentation on Google and LinkedIn directly, you're way too green. You haven't even sort of scratched the surface of like the low-hanging fruit. And, you're trying to maybe get overcomplicated with Primer. When is the right time to even start thinking about Primer? Like, what is that threshold that makes sense?
We typically find that when a company's spending north of 20K a month on digital ads, they've got we can come in and help them progress further than they currently are, right? And sort of take that next leap of either campaign efficiency or unlocking a new channel. However, before that, we've got some customers that are spending 10K a month, but they're either sophisticated and early stage, or they're just believers, Yeah.
Makes
But
sense.
it's sort of like, if you're a really early stage startup, very few founders of early stage startups are willing to sort of throw away a lot of money on ads, recognizing that it takes time to experiment to get it to work.
A related point here, what we often find is when we're doing experimentation with our customers, there's two types of experiments, or maybe three types of experiments, right? There's a holdout where you're trying to understand the incrementality of the channel itself. So broad, you set exclusions for the entire channel. There's a second type of test, which is a pulse up test, where you take a specific, audience and you increase the budgets or the bids or, however you define your spending for that audience. And then you have a pulse down, which is the exact opposite, right? Where you, instead of cutting it to 0, you cut it to 50%. And one of the most common things that we talk about with customers is like, well, I don't want to risk it. Like I want to know the incrementality, but I'm not willing to spend 50K to figure out the incrementality. And so do you see that in Primer? And what I mean by this is like, do you experience that with your customers where they're not spending enough to be able to actually see the impact of that spend, right? If you're only spending 1K a month, like you said, like 5K a month, you're not going to see it. So how do you guide customers through that?
I wish I had a good answer. Instead, we just don't engage with those customers.
I like it. Yep.
Yeah. I think there's so many companies that are eager to get better. I think at some point, hopefully we have to cross that divide. We have to figure out how to make the product serve those folks, nudge them in the right direction. But I don't have the answer yet. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. You work with larger customers, and I think that's the right way to think about it.
But I'll say this, like, I think I do think there's, I'd be curious how AI could help with this, nudge people in the right direction. I don't know. Something we're thinking about a little bit. It's like, how do we take something that, would at a larger company require like a team, you'd have to have a team of data scientists, right, in-house.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies have their marketing data science teams, that are, trying to help them understand, right? Like, building a causal inference model to figure out, who has the highest propensity to respond to an ad and thus should be within your audience, right? And you're not going to waste any money on folks outside of that. But even what you find in these like more sophisticated companies is, that marketing team might not have enough budget, so they're only spending money on this group, and they're not willing to experiment on these other ones. So
Exactly.
maybe we just have to change. Maybe we just have to, like take out all the CFOs and get them really drunk and to, like open up the checkbooks. I don't know.
Love it. I never thought getting CFOs drunk would be the topic of our podcast, but there we go. I think that what we have found successful in some cases is really walking people through the math and showing them that if you only spend $30K on this specific incrementality test, based on your CAC, you're only looking at an additional 30 opportunities. And I'm using a B2B metric. And your baseline is 300, and 30 means you're looking for a 10% lift. Is that random chance, or was that the result of this incrementality test? If you feel comfortable, right, we can tell you from a data science perspective what that is. But if you feel comfortable saying that, yes, we did see an incremental 30, and it wasn't random chance, it wasn't happenstance, right, then you're good. But if you want even more clear signal, you want to see 60 on a baseline of 300, guess what? You have to spend more based on your CAC, right? There's no magical sort of, magic 8-ball that'll do the alternative. So, okay.
That brings me back though to like, I mean, just on the topic, I think it makes me think about, I don't know. I just had an idea of how we need to build that into the product. I love that.
There
idea.
you go.
Thanks, Pranav. Yeah.
Boom. Okay. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about sort of all the stuff that's happened over the last, crazy that it's only been 2 years since this whole Gen AI world. What are you seeing your customers do in advertising with Gen AI? Like, there's a lot of like good demos. There's a lot of like good discussion. There's a lot of like people talking about the stuff that, they're doing in their personal lives. I love ChatGPT, use it all the time. Fantastic. But from a advertising perspective, have you seen customers really kind of figured out and unlock that process to go from 0 to 100? And I'm curious if you've seen anything like that, if you're able to share.
The place where I've seen it the most is in content generation, which is a natural extension of it. I haven't seen it. I've seen it to some extent on the targeting side. In coming back to Clay, right? The labeling, the categorization. But I don't think I've seen it at the analytics end of things in any really meaningful or powerful way yet. And I think that is, I think a performance marketing co-pilot is destined to exist. It'll be interesting to see how it gets built, though.
Yeah, that's a good one. We have some ideas and thoughts on that one. What about creative? Like, have you seen, like, I was talking to an agency owner just yesterday, and they were talking about they've gone all in on AI, and they work with large brands like public companies, luxury companies, and in 200 or 300K, they're producing 50 on point, great sort of videos for all types of formats, which would have costed that brand like $5 million if they had gone to, one of the larger agencies and done this. And I'm curious if you're seeing that in B2B yet, or not really. It's still very much like I send it to my, creative team, they do it, and, it takes however long it takes.
Unfortunately, I think it's more amongst our customer base, it's more that latter group, right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love like Opus Pro. I love Riverside. There's all these things that, I think there are, crafty companies using CapCut, all of that. But I have not seen, I constantly hear from customers about how they just don't have enough video assets.
Yeah. Yep. Same here. Like creative is always the blocker. Not in a bad way, right? It's not that the creative teams aren't working hard. It's just I don't think that anybody's cracked the nut on, that creative production stuff. I heard about this company called Icon. Did you hear about them? That they just launched a week or two ago on LinkedIn. And apparently they've gone from like, classic AI, 0 to 10 million ARR in like 5, weeks or something bonkers like that. I don't know if those numbers are accurate. And they've basically made you log into the platform and you give it some prompts and it just generates like graphic and video ads for you. Like apparently it just got cracked. I got no clue. It's a wait list. We'll see. But I'm eager to give it a shot. All right. Okay. Let's do a rapid fire. So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions and tell me the first thing that comes to mind. So what's the one marketing tactic in B2B that you think is completely overrated? Everyone does it. Just, it's maybe everyone needs to take a step back.
I mean, it's funny. The first thing that popped into my head was the webinar. The second thing that popped into my head was LinkedIn advertising. Yeah.
I like it. Well, that's spicy. LinkedIn advertising. That's interesting. Okay. So here's another one. What's a common myth in B2B that just needs to die?
That their audience doesn't exist on, Instagram or YouTube it's such a old school mentality.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it. We have a customer who has built their entire B2B business off of Meta. It's tens of millions. Okay. Here's another one. If you could tell each B2B marketer to go try out one new channel, what would that channel be like this day and age right now?
The one that popped into my head is Reddit, just because I'm really curious about it. And it's next on my list to experiment on.
All right. Fantastic. What's one marketing tool or app that you personally love outside of Primer and Paramark?
I mean, I love Riverside. Shout out to the podcast recording app we're using right now. I love them. I love Opus Pro. I adore ChatGPT. And I'm a big fan of Perplexity as well. Those are like in my day-to-day stack. I'm curious to dig in a little more on AirOps and Tofu HQ. Gonna check them out, spend some more time there. There's this one called Riz.Farm that looks pretty entertaining. Limelight.
Hang on. What is Riz.Farm? Like Riz, like as in charisma?
Like
Riz?
as in charisma. Yeah, check it out. Riz.Farm. It's sort of like how do you hack Reddit communities is basically what I think the gist of it is, which is why it was top of mind for me. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff out there. Visual Electric, I'm using these days for asset production. Shout out to Colin, another ex-drop boxer.
All right. Okay. Last one, and then we'll wrap it up. Who do you think is doing some of the best work in B2B today? Like, is there a company that's inspiring to you in terms of how they go to market?
PostHog, I just love them as a product, and I think that they're starting to invest in go to market, and I've noticed it, and I think they're doing a cool job. What's really interesting is, as far as I could tell, like one of the first things they've done is out of home, as opposed to email or LinkedIn or anything like that. I respect the Rippling growth team probably more than any other growth team out there. So
awesome.
they're the two.
Great. Amazing. Well, Keith, this was fantastic. Thank you for coming on. Are there any, do you do a bunch of LinkedIn, Twitter? Like, are you on those platforms, or should people go find you? Like, how do people engage with you?
You can find me, KCP Delaney, on LinkedIn and on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter as much as I should be. Follow Primer. We're on all social platforms. And check out, we've got some cool guides if you're looking to sort of build into different forms of Google and Meta campaigns on with the B2B use cases. There's a lot of great content on our website.
Amazing. Everybody go to Say Primer, SAY Primer.com. I know I'm going to, as we are scaling up our go-to-market. So Keith, thanks again for being here, and we'll catch up again in a few months.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, Pranav.
So there you go. That was Keith, the CEO and co-founder of Primer. Go check them out at sayprimer.com. We see them everywhere in our B2B customers. And I'm personally super excited to try it for ourselves. So tune in again next week for another great guest and a great conversation.